always hard to get something greenlit, no matter who you are. That's the crazy thing. The whole game is upside down now.
Does that make it hard to want to create?
If you aren't catching body blows, I don't know if the work is doing its job. I have no desire to pacify the audience. I'd rather be hated than stifled.
In 1991, a 7-year-old girl on Chicago's South Side had an idea. Inspired by the stories she heard from her grandmother and mother, Lena Waithe made it her mission to see the lives of herself, her family, and her neighbors brought to life on television.
For me, it was about beginning a legacy and making a name for myself, which, yes, is a vulnerability, but also becomes a strength. I am sort of the beginning of my own dynasty.
Moving to Los Angeles in her early 20s, Waithe worked her way through the entertainment industry, from an assistant to an Emmy winner for her writing, creating hit shows like The Chi and 20s, and eventually launching her own production company, Hillman Grad. Despite enjoying adulation, as well as facing pointed criticism for her distinct creative vision, Waithe remains committed to making the work that is authentic to her and shaping her legacy her own way.
If you're great, then it's hard to be ignored.
In the first act of your career, you've played Cinderella, architect, mogul. What is the role that you look forward to most playing in this second act?
You know, it's interesting.
And it all started with one idea.
Cool, we're good to go. Welcome to Idea Generation.
Thank you.
I'm curious, what part of growing up do you think best prepared you for your life in Hollywood, and what part left you the most vulnerable?
That's a really beautiful question. I think the thing that prepared me the most was being raised in a 3-generation house. Growing up in my grandmother's house, and my mom obviously being there as well, and then my sister and I, having that elder in the house who was from Arkansas, from the South, but moved to Chicago when she was 17. So having that history in the house and also getting those stories every now and then from her. One, she told me in particular, while she was pregnant with my mother was born into a segregated America still. So our grandmother was pregnant, driving, I don't know, across the country for some reason, pregnant, and stopped at a gas station to use the bathroom, and they didn't have a colored bathroom available, so she had to get in the car and keep going. And I was very young when she told me this, probably like 7 or 8. And I think it kind of gave me a very quick education about the world in which I lived and where I come from, and the quiet dignity in which she lived with and that I would inherit. And so I think having that quiet understanding and that quiet dignity helps you in a business that tries to rip you of it. And so that way you always maintain it, but you don't have to necessarily do it loudly. And in terms of the thing that made me most vulnerable is the fact that I had no connection to the business at all. There's no inheritance. So I think that for me, it was about beginning a legacy and making a name for myself, which, yes, is a vulnerability, but also becomes a strength because I am sort of the beginning of my own dynasty.
One of the recurrent themes in many of the guests that we've had on Idea Generation is working retail. Whether it's Tremaine Emory, Mike Amiri, Angelo from Awake, all of them cut their teeth on the sales floor. And I know you worked at a Blockbuster. What were the things that you learned about the audience watching them interact with like a tactile VHS box or a DVD box? What did you pick up from your conversations with them about how they appreciated films?
Well, another awesome question. I mean, for me, what I learned really actually was about the business. The machine that feeds the movies into the Blockbuster, when there was always that new release wall, it was almost as if they were telling you what to get. So you really weren't making a decision. It was often, I could see the people that would walk in and go straight to the new release wall versus those that walked in and kind of walked through the aisles of documentary or, thriller or horror or TV or foreign. What I learned is that if you want to watch something that's off the beaten path, you have to search for it. What I even learned about my own style was that I was constantly looking for interesting covers, not knowing much about what the movie was, but saying, okay, I think I want to check this out. Right? That's how I watched Hoop Dreams, is that renting a VHS of it while being at Blockbuster and be like, what is this documentary about? Two young black boys in Chicago whose dreams of going to the NBA. And I took it home and watched it, and it was moved and changed from watching that documentary, and also really stunned by seeing neighborhoods that I recognized and knew, and seeing people on the screen that reminded me of my family members. And I realized, oh, that was a treasure sitting in this store where I work, that if you're not paying attention, you can walk right by it.
How do you think the streaming environment, where on the one hand, you have everything in the world ever available to you at any moment, but then also everything balkanized by platform, how does that change the audience's relationship with discovery?
It's the same. When you go to a streamer, they're telling you what to click on. If you go, I even discovered it the other day, I was trying to find something, I think, on Netflix, and I had to search almost the whole title for it to come up. So it's still, that's the new version of going down the aisle and looking for something. And more often than not, when you turn on, there's a reason why, Netflix wants to tell you, here are the top 10 things people are watching, just to take the guesswork out for you. The legwork, rather. The effort is gone. Or if you go to Disney Plus, they're gonna put up their latest movie, so that way you can watch it. So the truth is, you're still being told what to watch. Even if a studio has a lot of money to promote a particular movie, that you're gonna see ads for it everywhere. The movies that you don't know about, you're not gonna go seek out. Therefore, the movies that are hidden or you can't find tend to be the ones that will probably change your life. And the ones that you can are ones that you may watch and forget that you saw it in a few weeks.
Speaking of Netflix, there was a news item a few weeks ago about some internal documents that leaked about sort of edicts from on high towards the creators to create shows that could be consumed without watching. I guess presuming that people are in bed doom scrolling while they're watching. As an artist and a creator, do you feel like being responsive to these kinds of changes in audience behavior are reasonable, or is this sort of a compromise of the artistic integrity of a body of work?
I mean, I think it speaks to the sheep mentality, where there's an idea that you just have hordes of people not paying attention. And when you're not paying attention, people can do things that are often not great. And so for me, the mission is to keep people's attention, obviously, while they're watching the work. And I think that is something that can be difficult to do, but it is a skill. But even I sit and watch cuts of my shows with my phone in hand. So if I ever get bored or look down, it's telling me something that, about my own attention span, but also about whether or not we're doing our job well. And the truth is, people do want to have things on in the background. People do want to have mindless television, but it's called that for a reason, that you don't need your mind to watch it. And that's valid and fair, but I do not aim to make that kind of entertainment. Even if someone may feel traumatized by the work, I'm not doing it for that purpose, but the mission is to write something that makes sense to me. And if it grabs you, a hold of you until the credits roll, then that's a job well done, whether you're pleased or not with the way it ends. But ultimately, I think it can be a bit of a scary thing, that if they ask you to write something that people don't have to pay attention to, it is taking value away from the artist's importance and significance in society. And if you take the power away from entertainers who tend to have a more liberal or more empathetic voice, and people aren't really paying attention or really listening to them anymore or valuing what they're doing, then we lose that voice. I mean, actors will tell you their job is to convey empathy. And so if we lose that, then we might be more doomed than we think.
Thinking about your writing, some of the sort of most profound and moving moments are in quiet looks or subtle reactions, not in telegraphed plot.
Right.
And to lose that, I think, does sort of diminish the value that the consumer can get out of the work.
Yeah, and the most dangerous thing a person can do is make art that moves people. So the mission is to have artists that make art that people barely pay attention to. I tend to think that's on purpose. Where do my ideas come from? Honestly, the world, life, real life. I'm not necessarily pulling things out of thin air. I think it all comes from something that I've witnessed or experienced.
At the outset of your career, you had the opportunity to be an assistant for Ava DuVernay and Mara Brock Akil.
And Gina Prince Bythewood, she would kill me if I didn't shout it out.
What advice or words from them ring in your ears in your most challenged moments?
You know what's interesting about all three of them? They weren't big advice givers. I do think there's this idea that your mentor or your boss is telling you very wise words and, regaling you with soliloquies and whatnot as you're there. But the truth is, it's behavioral and leading by example. So I think for me, I was witnessing what they were doing, watching them leaning in, watching them know when to lean back, being strategic about their moves, and also in the way in which they engage with people and doing it authentically. I thought was very interesting, and I definitely pulled different things from each of them. But the one thing I did ask Gina Prince Bythewood, which was a lovely story, where I was trying to convince her to go do a panel, and she was in post, so she was busy, but she said, what am I gonna say that's gonna change their lives? And I said, I don't know, what advice would you give to up and coming filmmakers like yourself? And she said, be great.
That's all.
Exactly. And so I was like, that's what your advice is? She's like, yeah, to be great. And so, of course, fast forward a few years later, I told her, I said, I get what you mean by that. It means if you're great, then it's hard to be ignored.
Speaking of greatness, the Thanksgiving episode of Master of None was a breakthrough moment for you. I would imagine a literally life-changing piece of art for you. But it's also a deeply personal moment, mined from your own lived experience. And when it made its way into the world and was received, it became sort of a cultural touch point. Is there a cost in sharing your truth with the audience?
I mean, I believe that when you're an artist, there is always a sacrifice of your personhood, your privacy, your humanity. But the reason why I think we make the sacrifice is to remind the people watching that we are the same. Even if we look different, even if we love differently, even if we worship differently, even if our families look different. Because what I learned actually from being out in the world after the Thanksgiving episode was available to people was that it wasn't just queer Black people coming up to me saying that they saw themselves. Now, the queer Black people do come up to me often to say they see themselves in the work. And I think that's what I thought it was for only. I was small-minded in thinking that this is for sort of just for us. And then Asian people or white straight people or people from the Latin community will come up to me and say, that's my family, or that reminds me of me, or I saw myself in that. And that was such an eye-opening experience for me to think that this very specific episode that was pulled from very specific memories that people that look nothing like me, that sometimes don't even speak the language that I do, could look at that episode and see themselves as well. And I couldn't help but cross into a different space in my life to say, oh, that is the secret, that we are all the same. And of course, we are often fed these stories about how different we are and ways to be grouped into different sections, which is fine, and that kind of helps you understand who you are and your identity. But the real truth is we're not different from each other, no matter what we look like.
It makes me think the standard thought in Hollywood prior to that moment and a series of moments by your contemporaries around that time was that films and TV had to steer towards the mainstream in order to reach a mass audience. And clearly, your body of work says that it does not. Do you think that that was just a fundamental misunderstanding of the audience by the industry, the executives? Or do you think that you were able to engineer your stories in such a way that they could transcend the community that they were born out of?
Well, I think it's both. I think there's an idea that a broad audience is one that is white and one that is straight, and probably one that is middle class. Slightly maybe goes into working class. Because if you're trying to appeal to middle America, that is what I think the industry thinks of. So if you're black, brown, wealthy, or have a specific experience, they think that middle America may not be inclined to relate. And that also buys into the idea that we can't see each other as human beings. And the truth is, you know, we've seen different shows, I'm talking about TV shows specifically, that deal with very specific subject matter, be very popular. But you take something like Breaking Bad, that is prestige television, but it's also dealing with the fact that a person can't afford to pay for medical expenses, which is something that a broad audience can relate to. And so, again, it's about how we as audiences see ourselves. And I think what people are watching tells us a lot about where society is.
You started as a writer and eventually became an actor and then a superstar. And in the process of that, you also became a brand and became the subject of a scrutiny that blurred the lines between the professional and the personal and the art and sort of every facet of your life. Do you think that that is a reasonable ask of an artist? And is that burden, at the end of the day, worth it for the success that sort of brings that spotlight and that attention?
I think it is worth it, and I think it's not new. Artists being scrutinized is not new because of where an artist sits and what they have to do. An artist's job, really, if you're a writer particularly, is to be an observer of human behavior. And then it's about interpreting it and sort of feeding it back to other humans. And other humans are gonna have opinions about your view of humanity. And I think I've gotten to a place where I understand that they who are watching artists have every right to form opinions about the artist, because that's what people do, based on what you know, what you've been taught, where you come from, you know, what have you been told about women and how women are supposed to behave? What have you been told about, you know, what it means to be ladylike, or what it means to be a good artist, what it means to be a good black person. So whatever you've been told about that, if I don't fit that description of what it means to be ladylike, or what to be a good artist, or what you think a good movie is supposed to be, if I don't give you that, then you're gonna say, hey, I disagree with that. I don't like that. It's nothing to do with me, but more to do with what you've been told I'm supposed to be, or how I'm supposed to show up, in your opinion, in your view. So you're never wrong.
But is it hard for you, thinking about something like Queen and Slim, which sits at a 98% rating on Rotten Tomatoes for both audience and critics, but was the subject of a lot of critical discourse and was impugned, in my estimation, sort of paradoxically, both for your closeness to the subject and also your distance from the subject. Does that make it hard to want to create in an environment where you can do something that you feel is authentic and genuine and important and still catch body blows on left and right on the internet from, you know, sort of two sides?
I think, to me, if you aren't catching body blows, I don't know if the work is doing its job. I don't desire to make work that everyone likes, because then I'm doing something more of a disservice, I think, to the audience. I have no desire to pacify the audience. I think the mission is to make something that I feel that I can watch and stand by, and then it is no longer mine. Once you give it to the world, it's not mine anymore.
Did you always feel like that?
I think it's really about understanding the history of what it is to be a Black writer, or to be really specifically to be a queer Black writer. I mean, for me, people that I look to are James Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry. Literally reading a book about Baldwin's life right now. It's like just under 600 pages, rightfully so. And just reading about his troubles and what he had to deal with, and the letters that he was writing, it's almost startling to see, some of the things that are in there. I mean, this is in the book, but as at one point, Jet magazine said that James Baldwin knows nothing about Negroes. I mean, it's quoted, it's in the book. And of course, I highlighted it just in terms of what an interesting thing, because it's where he had gotten in his career at that point. Lorraine Hansberry, there are certain Black people at the time that didn't think Raising the Sun was an accurate depiction of what it was to be a Black family at the time. And obviously, Raising the Sun still stands as one of the greatest plays I think ever to be written. It's like if you're a Black woman with an opinion, probably chances are you're gonna get some blows. But I'd rather be a Black woman who is free to express her opinion than be a woman, Black queer woman, whatever you want to define me as someone that is afraid to express herself out of fear that someone may not be pleased with what I have to say. I'd rather be hated than stifled. I think you sort of know when to pivot when hopefully you can really hear yourself. So I think it's about listening to yourself and also the universe, to not think that you are the center of the universe, but to know that you are of it. And so you have to listen to yourself and the universe as well.
A lot of your early work took place in a moment, sort of culturally, that it was incredibly aligned with in terms of telling these stories of identity and marginalized communities. And as a result, I think, seized on the zeitgeist and enjoyed that, both in its sort of critical reception and its commercial reception. We are now 6, 7, 8 years later, and, one look at the cover of the New York Times will tell you that we are in a very different world politically and culturally. Does it change how you think about what stories you want to tell? And does it create more friction in getting those stories that you want to tell greenlit?
Well, it's always hard to get something greenlit, no matter who you are. That's the crazy thing. The whole game is upside down now. But no, I can't change what I want to talk about necessarily based on what's happening outside. Yes, you want to reflect the times, but I also have to reflect where I am as an artist and as a person in my life. And so as we evolve as human beings, so does the art. And I just always think about certain of my favorite musicians. Their albums over time don't always necessarily reflect what's going on in the world, but what's going on in their world. And they're bringing me into that. And I think that's what my mission is to write something that's honest and true to me right now, and let it be a time capsule for who I was then. And because I am living in the world and I'm of the world, whatever space that I'm in is also a reflection of the world because I'm in it and I'm of it. So as an artist, I think the important thing is to always listen to yourself, and getting things made is, it almost doesn't matter if you get it greenlit or made. It's about, did you get it out? And can you share it with someone? Because you can share something with 8 people in a room. If the world sees it, isn't necessarily the measure of success. But sometimes you just gotta get something out for the sake of it.
As your career has grown and, you have become, again, gone from being a writer to an actor, and now to being a mogul, and managing a company and a staff and stuff. How do you find the balance to be able to, create the isolation to create and still manage all of this other stuff?
I think I'm good at isolating, but I'm also a person that is social, and I do like being out. I mean, when we first met, we were at a party. It was like, the night of the Met, like classic, but I enjoy that and need it. But sometimes socializing gets sacrificed or cut. But when I have the time, I try to make the most of it, to spend time with people and check in, catch up with loved ones. But that is something that is very important to the process, is carving out hours and hours and hours of time where there's nothing scheduled. So I can, whether if I have to do reading, obviously writing, or sometimes just doing nothing, so I can listen to myself, is so important. And it's a privilege that a lot of people sometimes can't afford, don't have the ability to do it. And so I take it very seriously that when I say I need some time, people afford me that.
You've created and launched a number of different sitcoms during the course of your career, some of which, like Boomerang or 20s, have had a couple seasons. The Shy, on the other hand, is now on season 7 and looking towards season 8. You still have to put the same amount of emotional and mental labor into world building to create something that lives for 2 seasons versus something that lives for 7 or 8 seasons. What is the sense of gratification that you get now being on the other side of having, birthed all of these characters and watched them live in the world for this really extended period of time?
So I don't have kids, and that's by choice. But I totally get it when people refer to TV shows or movies as children, because it does feel like it's this thing that you birthed that's now out in the world that, again, you don't really have any control over. But particularly these characters that are on The Shy, that are played by real people, that are getting older, or young kids that grow up in front of us, it has been a life-changing experience and journey for me, for them, for the audience. And it's one that I'm just very grateful for. And I think what I try to do is always be in a space of self-discovery and always be paying attention to what is going on or what's happening, or what conversations are people having that we feel like we can add to that conversation on the show. So as long as life is happening and the world is spinning, there's always stories to tell. There's always new things to discover. So I think for me, it's about just sort of pouring in to the show just with newfound energy every season, and looking at it as an album. I really do think of each season as an album. So no album should sound like the one that came before it. And so the mission is just to always keep people surprised, keep people engaged, and keep their heads nodding.
Has your process towards creating the show evolved over time?
Creating shows, I always like writing a pilot. I wrote a pilot for The Shy, I wrote a pilot for 20s, got in there with the pilot for Boomerang. I think that's where I kind of find it. It is the first step. It is the seed, and it's where, a tree will grow. And so I just try to plant things and create different characters that could possibly spark up relationships far down the line that I don't even think about in the moment. I think if you can create specific enough characters that really have meat on their bones, and sometimes don't even, you can add meat to the bones if you need to as you go. But it's one of those things where it really is a marathon, and it really is like being in a studio with instruments, and everybody's like, all right, let's start jamming and playing and seeing what we land on, if there's something we start to like. And that's really what the writing process is, because it is with a band. It's not me by myself. There's a beautiful team of writers that help me shape every season. And we are in the lab before the actors come in, and we have to make sure it's interesting and that people won't be looking on their phones when they're watching it.
What is the most important thing one has to do to lead a productive writer's room?
Well, I'm very grateful to my showrunners, Justin and Jewel, who run the day-to-day in the room. They call me in once they've had, some big ideas that they want to pitch. But I think the biggest thing is keeping it moving forward. It's like, don't linger on a thing for too long. If you do reach an impasse, then kick it down the line until we can all talk about it. And also saying yes and, saying, okay, I like that, yes and adding and building upon an idea or a story. And also, I think vulnerability, people in the room being vulnerable, not unlike I have to be vulnerable when I sit in front of the laptop and say what's really going on or what I've experienced and what I've gone through. And you can often see that our lives show up on the screen. Like, there's pregnancies, there's deaths of parents, there's things like that that happen in real life with the writers, and that's going to seep into the scripts, and people will kind of see that a little bit this season on the show.
When we were growing up in the days of peak network TV, when a show reached 100 episodes, 5 seasons, 6 seasons, syndication, everyone is rich forever.
Right.
I understand that is not the economic model
Nah,
anymore.
not at all.
How does that downward pressure affect how you approach creating and sort of broadly your approach to creating television shows generally?
Well, a lot of shows don't last for as long as shows like The Chi. That's a lot of that to do when we came out. But I think the biggest thing is we have to look at every season with fresh eyes. And also, I look at it as keeping the story going, because sometimes you think, oh, I'll end it here, hang it up, and retire. And what we have to do is to keep it fresh. Like, how do we keep The Chi new for us so that way the audience is just as excited about it? We have to be excited about writing it. And I think that's what we get to do every season, go, okay, what is going to get us hyped about writing this season? And it's a beautiful relationship with us and the audience, but it's a longer marathon, now. Like, you don't get to hang it up after 100 episodes. You gotta keep going, and even then, it's just not the kind of business where you can cash out at a certain age. You gotta kind of keep singing for yourself for longer than you probably like. My biggest advantage as a creator, as an entrepreneur, I think my advantage is that I can see the world through a lens that's very specific to my own. Existing in the world that I do things that it's hard for other people to understand. And so I think being able to see the whole picture is definitely an advantage.
You mentioned mining your own experience for, the content of the writing. A lot of your projects, 20s, Thanksgiving episode, The Chi, come from your sort of pre-Hollywood life. But your life since then has become something that is perhaps slightly less relatable to, a normie. And does that, with the attention, the fame, wealth, make it more challenging to find sort of fodder for your output?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think there's always that thing that happens where you look up and you've earned a life for yourself, and then you almost kind of get penalized for it. Because they're like, are you one with the people? Are you still with the people? I love that line where Kendrick says he grieves differently. And that could be it's a very layered line. And somebody could argue, well, yeah, you do grieve differently. But it also could be like he feels a lot of grief for losing a lot of things beyond people. His anonymity, for one, his innocence, and many other things. And so, but that is something that I think there are things that he can talk about in his music that other people can relate to, just because he's gotten to a place as a human being where he's not afraid to be even more vulnerable in the work. And therefore they say, oh, I also experienced that. Like, I went through a thing with my dad. I had a cousin like this. And so I think for me, the human experience just becomes even more heightened with what comes with all this stuff. And some people may say, well, I'd rather have a bad human experience in a big house than a small one. But I don't know if you're in a big house, if that makes the pain of loss feel better. I think that's the thing. I think people have tricked you into thinking if you're in a big house and you're crying, the tears aren't as bad. But if you're in a small house, the tears are worse. Or if there's no house at all, it's worse. It's like if you're crying, you're crying.
A lot of your work, particularly at the outset of your career, dealt with, obviously, the stories of marginalized people and social justice. Also, fairly early in your career, you found yourself in a situation where 2 of your collaborators were on the receiving end of accountability. How did you sort of parse that dichotomy in the moment, and how do you think about it now, 6, 7 years later?
Well, I think the thing for me was that it becomes easier for us to focus on a singular person and equate them with a particular issue. And to me, I think the issue is bigger than the specific person. I think we get further if we talk about the issue itself and how it came to be or why that was allowed versus focusing on a particular person, because they aren't the first person to probably do something like that, and they won't be the last if we don't address the bigger issue. What happens if we as a society take accountability as a whole as to the things that are happening in our world? So almost ask us to take accountability for what's going on and ask ourselves, how do we want to move forward? Because I think pointing fingers and walks of shame don't really get us anywhere. I'm often not looking at the person the mob is attacking, but rather the mob itself.
In the first act of your career, you've played Cinderella, architect, mogul. What is the role that you look forward to most playing in this second act?
Playwright, stage actor. I think that's really where I'm looking, is a playhouse where people can't have their phone and they have to be with people and we have to have a human experience together. That's really, I think, what excites me and has always excited me, especially being a kid from Chicago where theater is sort of in our blood. I really just like to have an experience that is connected to other human beings. That's really sort of, I think, where I'm at now. And I think that's because for me, TV was a connective tissue there. Even though there was a screen, I'm watching television with my family, but it felt like we were all connected. And also we were. I mean, there were other people watching the same thing at the same time, at the same network, on the same night, because that's just how it was. But it was a collective experience. And I think that's what I want to get back to.
Our legacies are written in part by ourselves through our actions, and in part by the people who are perceiving and receiving those actions. But the beautiful thing about getting older is realizing that there is constantly an opportunity to amend that story and also reframe the way that the past is looked at. What are the parts of your legacy that you are most focused on cementing as you move forward?
You know, it's interesting. I don't know really if we know what our legacies will be. So I can want to cement something, but ultimately it'll be told by people that I probably won't even get an opportunity to meet. Because I find, like for example, Ellis Haslip is a gentleman who I became aware of because of his cousin, Melissa Haslip, who, queer black man, had a show on in the 70s called Soul, ! That was on public television. And it was a platform for poets, writers, actors. James Baldwin was and Nikki Giovanni did a conversation that was filmed for this show. Many poets performed on the show. And I saw a documentary about it that Melissa did. And I watched the documentary and I wanted to be helpful to make sure the documentary didn't only live on PBS, but would also live on HBO Max for a time, which it did. So it was easier for people to find. That thing again, trying to help people find something that maybe they ordinarily wouldn't see. And I was educated about this person. And then as I'm reading the book about Baldwin's life, Ellis Haslip's name pops up in about the 400s. And I know that name now because I was educated by his cousin who did a documentary about him that I asked if I could see a link to it, and I watched it, and now I know his name, and I've shared his name here. His legacy continues because his cousin made a documentary that I got a chance to see that now I know where that conversation comes from, that I loved and saw between Baldwin and Giovanni. I didn't know it was coordinated by a queer black man. I had no idea. And so his legacy for a time was kind of hidden from me, but I'm grateful that I was able to find it and get to say I helped to hopefully introduce him to people that he was also invisible to. And I think that is the thing about legacies, is they sneak up on us, when we aren't looking, because someone else picked it up and made sure someone else was aware of it. Because even like with Legacy Talk with Lena Waithe is that I want to cement some people's legacies that other people may have overlooked. And there will probably be instances in where even all that I've accomplished can still be invisible, can still be ignored, can still be missed. And hopefully, maybe, someone will see this interview or find something and pick it up and say, did you know about this? Were you aware of that? Or that she did that too? I've left the breadcrumbs. Maybe somebody will find them or maybe not, but I have no idea where someone will find a piece of my legacy and want to show it to someone else that maybe wasn't aware of it. So that I don't know what will be submitted. I don't really have a preference. I love all the things I've got to be a part of, you know, even things that I've acted in, whether it be Ready Player One, which was an amazing opportunity for me to be a part of something like that, to be a part of Spielberg's legacy as well. And then to work with Daniel Kaluuya, to have our legacies intertwined and so many others, and Melina and all the many people that I've gotten a chance to work with. If there's a part of my legacy, it's the people that I've gotten to work with. Aziz, obviously, like all these people that have helped to make me become who I am and have grown me as a person and as an artist. I hope that my community really, my creative artist community, that to me I think is my legacy.
Well, thank you for intertwining your legacy with mine
thank
and the
you.
Idea Generation audience. It is my supreme hope that some people out there watch this conversation and are able to glean some, kernels of wisdom from what you've shared with us. This is truly the Grail episode that I have been chasing since 2022.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you so much.